Even if this were your first Sunday in a church in your whole life, if you have lived in this society, you probably have heard this story before. But there might be some things yet to learn. Even if this is the very first moment you have ever stepped into a church, and if it is, welcome, and we're so glad you're here, you'd probably know this story. You have in your mind Mary and Joseph and the donkey on their way on the road to Jerusalem. You have in your mind the knocks on the doors, the checking and the saying of no, there's no room at this inn or that one. You probably have in your mind the stable and the baby and the wise men. If you have an imagination like mine, the wise men have camels with them. And they're on the road in these very regal-looking robes, walking. And yet it only took them 12 days to get from Iran to Jerusalem. And they kneel down in the hay in this barn that looks like it probably belongs in Iowa. And they open these tiny treasure chests. I don't know why in my imagination the treasure chests are so small, but they are, baby-sized, I guess. And they open their tiny treasure chests. And Mary, as our Mary did, holds baby Jesus up a little bit to see what's in those boxes. And they pay him homage, and then they turn around, and I guess they take a nap or something, because in a dream they're told to go home a different way. And so they do. You've heard this story before. You know this story. There are a few things, for me, that have unlocked this story a little bit. This year, I learned about the shape of the houses that people in Bethlehem were probably living in. The shape of these 2-room houses, where they had a slightly higher area that was fancier for guests, and a slightly lower area where the family would live all in one room with their animals. I learned a little bit this year, too, about the census, this requirement that everyone return to the place of their ancestral home. There's a lot of people from Bethlehem. So a lot of people were on their way, and Mary and Joseph were maybe a little bit slow, and a lot of other people got there first. And so they're knocking on these doors, and they're saying, not, is there any room at the hotel, but is your upper room full yet? Because that society had all of these structures to say who deserved which kind of space. And if Mary and Joseph had been of high stature, room would have been made for them in one of those upper spaces, which tells you a little something about how the people in those houses were receiving them. That they're saying, no, there are people that are higher in the pecking order than you, that are already there. And the fact that somebody finally took pity on them and said, okay, you can stay with us. You can stay with us in the lower one. I'm going to scoot that back a little. You can stay with us in the family home, even though it's not fancy and the animals are in here. That was an act of mercy. They finally found a place. I learned this year a little bit, too, about those wise travelers and who they might have been. We talk about them sometimes as kings or as wise men. These would have been people who were doing all they could to learn about what was coming. People who wanted to find out where things were headed, who wanted prophecy to give them a way forward. I'm sympathetic to that. They were also people with more resources than they needed, with enough to spare, with enough time and money to devote some leisure time to the reading of books and the looking at stars and the asking of questions, listening to lore, imagining. There's a certain kind of people who have enough time for things like this at that time, and a certain kind of people who wouldn't have had time, who would have been spending so much of their lives working that there just wasn't time for all that reading and looking and thinking. We know that story too. In our own society, people who have plenty of time to pursue their hobbies, and people who are working back to back to back, night shift after night shift, with no time at all to look at the stars. This is a division that existed at the time of Jesus and that continues to exist today. And those of them and those of us on the side with time and resources are sometimes seeking a way forward, trying to figure out, what do we do? What is coming? How can we move forward? Where is the one who is going to lead us? They were looking for signs, and they found one. A star that they had been waiting for that rose. Something unusual. There are lots of ideas of what it could be that people were looking at that particular time, but we don't know exactly. Something striking. A comet? A planet that was especially close? In any case, it got them off their butts and got them moving. They decided, this is the moment, let's go, let's do it. And because they were expecting royalty, they stopped in with other royalty on the way. They stopped in with the center of power, with Herod, figuring he'll know which royal family birthed this new leader. But he didn't know. Herod heard that question and said, when you find out, come back and tell me. When you find him, pass on my greetings, and then come back and let me know so that I too can go and pass on my greetings. Power is like that a little bit. Having some power is almost never enough for us. We almost never feel like, okay, good, that's enough. I'm satisfied. I can do everything I want to do. It's maybe even a little too much. I'd like to give some away. There's something in us that thinks maybe a little bit more. I would feel secure if I could just have a tiny bit more. I have a little sympathy for Herod there too. Although he doesn't end up looking good in this story. But those wise ones left from Herod, followed whatever their sign was and whatever lore they had learned, and found that humble family home with the animals and the other people probably and the other guests and everyone gathered. And there was something there that let them see past what they were expecting. This to me is the key, the thing that I want to take with me. They came expecting a baby king who would have the trappings of royalty, and instead they found someone whose parents were not even of high enough stature to deserve the upper room. Instead, they found a working class baby in probably a messy space with lots of other people piled in. And yet they were holding their expectations lightly enough that they were able to recognize that he was what they were looking for. This week, we have the first tool in our toolkit, the tool of humility. And to me, I think humility is right there in that moment. The holding of our expectations lightly enough that we can recognize what we're looking for when it doesn't look like we thought it would. We can't really help but have some expectations about what things are going to be like. It's baked into our nature. We are creatures who imagine. We're always a few steps ahead of ourselves. We're always thinking about what things are going to be like. What will it feel like when I achieve that thing, when I become that way, when I meet that person that I'm looking for, when I find that job, when I go on that trip, when I receive that gift? What will it be like? What will it look like? How will I know? We can't help it, and that's okay. This is part of our gift, that we have this imagination. But humility means holding lightly that picture of what things are going to be like. Holding lightly, loosening our grip on what we think the other person might say, or what we think they might do, or what we think they might need. Recognizing our own expectations and loosening our grip on them. Because there will be signs. The star will rise. God is with us with a hand on our back, trying to guide us into place if we are not so rigid in what we imagine things will be like. Those wise ones could have walked right past that door. In fact, they could even have done this. They could have walked into Bethlehem and looked around and seen the fanciest house in town and said, "That's the one. That's obviously the one where the baby king will be," and walked right up and knocked on the door and discovered there was no baby there. Or maybe discovered there was a baby there and gotten totally mixed up. But something in the way that they had studied and prepared made them able to recognize Jesus. With working class parents in the lower level with the animals, wrapped in swaddling clothes, or maybe by the time they got there a little bit bigger, who knows? Maybe they were very fast walkers. But to be able to recognize him, to be able to recognize this is the one, and to be able to say, here are those gifts. I have to imagine in that space, they might have looked down at their gifts and thought, we might have brought the wrong thing. You know, we might have not thought this all the way through. These might not be what this family needs. A family with everything they need already, symbolic gifts might be perfect. A working class family in that lower level with the animals might have appreciated a different set of gifts. But here we are. To recognize in this working class baby the one who would receive the crown, the one who would receive the gold of royalty and the frankincense of divinity and the myrrh of his eventual death, that baby, they were able to see. In these polarizing times, for me, I feel like everything that comes up in the news, I already know how it's going to play out. I keep seeing things. Boy, looking at the news right now is like getting punched in the face over and over. And everything that comes up, I think immediately, oh, another one. I know how this is going to go. I know who these people are and how they're going to act. I know what's going to happen here. There's no point even starting a conversation with people like that. And I'm not wrong every time. And I think it's important to recognize that. I'm building these expectations out of what I have seen. And yet, humility requires me to loosen my grasp on what I think will come. Being open to the idea that other people and that situations might surprise me, and that the Christ child might look different than I thought. At the beginning of this season, at the beginning of this stretch of building tools, may we all loosen our grasp on our expectations and make a little space for humility so that when God shows up looking different, we can recognize him or her or them, and we can offer our gifts. Amen.